You can hear a man speak for hours and still not know what he feels, but watch what his hands do in a single moment of silence, and the truth will whisper. There is something profoundly revealing about the human body when it forgets to lie. In a world dominated by speech, texts, calls, promises, declarations, what often goes unnoticed is what cannot be rehearsed. The unconscious gesture, a flicker of hesitation before he holds your hand, the brief recoil before offering comfort, the way he adjusts his body when you express sadness, or whether he moves at all. These tiny movements carry a weight of truth that the tongue may never utter. They bypass the filter of intention and reveal the deeper layers of the mind and heart, those driven by the emotional brain, not the rational one. In neuroscience, this moment is described as limbic resonance, a subtle alignment or dissonance between nervous systems. In Eastern philosophy, it is called energetic coherence, the harmony or misalignment of mind, body, and spirit. But in simple human terms, it is this: when a person feels something deeply, the body confesses it before the mind can conceal it. And so, if you are seeking to understand someone, not by what they say, but by who they are, it begins here with stillness, with attention, with your awareness anchored in the now, so that nothing escapes your presence. This talk is not just about him, it is about you, your capacity to perceive with clarity, your ability to detach with compassion, and your journey toward becoming a master of your own energy, so that no gesture, however subtle, passes by without you understanding the lesson it came to teach. There are moments in life when you don't need words to feel the truth. You simply sense it. A subtle movement of the hand, a shift in posture, a slight delay in a response. These micro-signals speak in the language of the unconscious. They emerge not from rehearsed thinking, but from a place much deeper, the emotional brain, the nervous system, the embodied self. And yet, most people remain unaware of these signs. They search for clarity in verbal explanations while ignoring the signals that were always there waiting to be seen. When we talk about understanding someone's true feelings, especially in intimate relationships, we must begin by learning to observe, not with suspicion, but with calm attentiveness. Imagine this: a woman sits across from a man she's known for years. She asks him if everything is okay between them. He smiles, says yes, and continues talking about his day. But just before answering, he paused. His eyes flicked momentarily to the floor. His hands, once resting calmly on the table, briefly clenched into fists before relaxing. She noticed, she felt something shift in the atmosphere. That micro moment, that slight gesture, spoke louder than the words that followed. This is what we mean by the gesture being the language of the soul. It is unfiltered. It bypasses logic, control, and conscious effort. It reveals the true nature of someone's internal world. In psychology, such cues are called non-verbal leakage. These are the slips, the unguarded behaviors that occur when there is inner emotional conflict. When someone says one thing but feels another, the body leaks what the mind tries to hide. The hands, in particular, carry deep emotional intelligence. In ancient spiritual traditions, the hands were seen not merely as instruments of action, but as extensions of the heart. In fact, the energy center associated with love and emotion, the heart chakra, is directly connected to the arms and hands. This is why acts of love are so often physical. A gentle touch, a hand held in silence, an arm wrapped in protection. When a person feels emotionally open and connected, their hands tend to be relaxed, expressive, open. When they are guarded, defensive, or hiding something, the hands often become restless, closed, or rigid. These patterns are not conscious. They are intuitive expressions of the emotional state within. Consider a story. A woman, after years of marriage, began to feel a distance forming between herself and her partner. There were no fights, no betrayals, no cruel words, but something had changed. She couldn't name it at first, until one evening, as she sat beside him on the couch and reached for his hand, he hesitated, not enough to be noticed by someone else, but she felt it, that tiny delay, that microsecond of withdrawal before connection, pierced her more deeply than if he had shouted. Because in that single gesture, she understood something had shifted inside him, something unspoken. These are the micro moments of truth. They are the quietest revelations, but they speak with undeniable clarity, if we are grounded enough to listen. In neuroscience, this awareness is called social, emotional attunement. The human brain is designed to pick up on subtle signals, facial expressions, tone changes, gestures, so that we can understand others without words. This is rooted in the mirror neuron system, a network in the brain that activates both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else perform the same action. This means we are wired to feel what others feel, to sense their emotional state through their body language. But this ability is only available to us when we are present. When the mind is clouded by overthinking, emotional reactivity, or fear, we miss these subtle cues. That is why inner stillness is not optional. If you want to understand the emotional truth of those around you, it is essential. Without emotional clarity within, you will project your own fears or assumptions onto others. You will hear what you expect, not what is actually being said. You will interpret a gesture not based on what it truly meant, but based on your inner noise. Let us reflect on this. How often do we rush into judgment about someone's intention, only to later realize we misunderstood them entirely? How often have we overlooked the truth that was revealed in silence because we were too focused on the drama of words? To understand another, we must first train ourselves to observe, not as a judge, but as a mirror, not with control, but with compassionate detachment. One powerful practice is to simply sit in presence with someone, no talking, no agenda, just silent observation. Notice their gestures, their breathing, the way their energy feels in the space. This is not about suspicion or paranoia. It is about quiet discernment. It is about learning to feel truth rather than chase it with questions. A person's consistency between their words, tone, eyes, and gestures is often the most reliable indicator of sincerity. And sometimes the opposite is even more revealing. When a man says, "I'm fine," but his foot is tapping rapidly, his jaw is clenched, and his eyes avoid yours, believe the gesture, not the words. Now let us move deeper. If the first key to understanding someone's true feelings lies in observing their unfiltered gestures, the second key is developing the inner stillness required to perceive those gestures accurately. Most people are so caught in their own emotional storms that they cannot see clearly what is happening in front of them. Just like a pond cannot reflect the sky when its surface is agitated, the human mind cannot reflect truth when it is consumed by inner noise. This is where the discipline of emotional stillness becomes vital. Stillness is not passivity. It is not silence born of suppression. It is an inner calm that allows perception to become pure. It is the ground from which wisdom can rise. There's a simple story from Eastern tradition. A student once asked a teacher, "How can I see the truth in others?" The teacher took the student to a still lake and threw a stone into it. Ripples spread across the surface, distorting the reflection of the sky. The teacher said, "When the mind is like this agitated, it reflects nothing clearly, but when the mind is calm like the surface before the stone, it becomes a perfect mirror. Then you will see." In our relationships, this principle applies every day. If you are anxious, reactive, or emotionally triggered, you will misread people. You will invent meanings that are not there. But when you are centered, calm, and anchored in presence, you begin to see the invisible. You begin to notice not only what someone says, but how they say it. You pick up the subtle pauses, the energy behind the words, the incongruence between affection and action. This is not spiritual fluff. Neuroscience confirms that emotional self-regulation enhances cognitive empathy. In other words, when your brain is not overwhelmed by your own emotional noise, it has more capacity to understand others. Your perception sharpens, your intuition becomes more reliable. You feel the shift in someone's tone not just as a sound, but as a message. You read the tension in a jawline not as a random movement, but as a revelation. But stillness must be cultivated. It does not arrive by accident. It arrives through practice, daily silence, breathwork, walking in nature without the need to think, watching your own emotions rise and fall without judgment. These are not empty rituals. They are training grounds for awareness, and in the context of love and relationship, this kind of awareness becomes a form of protection. When your mind is clear and your energy is stable, you no longer chase mixed signals. You no longer beg for verbal validation. You simply observe. If a man avoids looking at you when you express your pain, that means something. If he turns his body away during a vulnerable conversation, that is not meaningless. These gestures are messages, and to see them, you must first become the kind of person who listens not just with the ears, but with your whole being. This is the foundation of wise relationships. It is not control. It is not manipulation. It is inner clarity, the ability to stay rooted in your own center so that the truth in others can be felt without needing it to be spoken. Emotional maturity is not just about how you express yourself. It is about how you receive what others reveal, even when they don't intend to reveal it. This requires discernment. It requires calm. It requires the courage to accept what is rather than what you wish it were. When a gesture tells you someone's heart is distant, you don't need to confront them with anger. You don't need to accuse or plead. You can simply receive the message and adjust your inner posture. Protect your peace. Honor your intuition, and if necessary, step away, not as a reaction, but as a decision made in clarity. Because in the end, no one can hide who they are forever. The body always tells the truth. The hands, the eyes, the posture, the breath, all of these speak when the mouth goes silent. And you, if you have trained your awareness, will be able to hear it. There is a moment in every relationship when words become secondary and energy becomes primary. A subtle movement, a touch, or even the absence of a touch carries more emotional weight than a dozen well-constructed sentences. You might not always remember the exact words someone used, but you will always remember how their hands moved when they spoke to you, how their energy filled the space, or how their presence, or lack of it, made you feel. When someone truly feels something, their body becomes an echo of that emotion, and among all gestures, the movements of the hands are often the most revealing. The hands are extensions of the emotional body. While the mind may construct words carefully, the hands often act on impulse, moved by emotion rather than logic. This is why, when someone is nervous, their hands fidget. When someone is sincere, their hands often open, reach forward, or connect. And when someone is hiding something, their hands might retreat, fold tightly, or stiffen. These are not random habits. They are the language of vulnerability. Think of a man who is genuinely moved by something you've said. Maybe you shared a story about your past, something painful or deeply personal. He doesn't just listen with his ears. He leans forward, his hand gently resting on your arm, not in a rehearsed way, but in a natural, almost subconscious act of connection. That hand on your arm may speak more truth than his entire response afterward, because when the heart speaks, the hands often follow. When someone is emotionally open, the hands behave accordingly. They soften, they express, they comfort. In contrast, imagine the same situation, but the man stays rigid. His hands remain folded. His posture doesn't change. He may say the right words, nod in agreement, but the lack of movement tells you something. There is a wall between what he is saying and what he is feeling. The absence of a sincere gesture, especially in emotionally charged moments, becomes louder than words. It tells you, I'm here, but I'm not fully with you. Gestures such as touching the chest, placing a hand over the heart, extending the hand in a gentle offering, these are almost universally associated with openness and sincerity. They reveal emotional access. When a person does this without thinking, it usually means their emotional body is engaged. The gesture is raw, not polished. It's in these moments that you glimpse the truth beneath the surface. There is a small story about a woman who had been in a long-term relationship. Over time, her partner became emotionally distant. He no longer laughed at the same things, no longer reached for her hand in public, no longer looked at her with that spark. She tried talking to him, asking questions, initiating affection. But something was missing. One evening, after a long day, she sat beside him on the couch and broke down in tears. He looked at her. He said all the right things, but his hands remained folded in his lap. He didn't reach for her. He didn't move toward her. She said nothing in response, but in that one moment she understood. The gesture that should have emerged naturally, if love was still alive, never came. This is the kind of truth you feel before you understand it, a truth that cannot be faked. It is deeply human, deeply embodied, and it calls us to pay attention not just to what people say, but to what they do in the in-between spaces of emotion. Understanding this doesn't make you cynical. It makes you discerning. You begin to trust what your body feels instead of doubting your intuition every time someone gives you a well-rehearsed answer. This is not about catching someone in a lie. It is about waking up to what you already know but have been trained to dismiss. In relationships especially, we often override our instincts in favor of hope. We explain away the missing gestures. We convince ourselves that maybe they're just tired or not affectionate or don't express themselves that way. But deep inside you always know, gestures reveal emotional temperature. Just as you can feel warmth from a fire without touching it, you can feel sincerity or absence from another human being without needing them to explain it. When someone is emotionally available, their hands will express their heart before their words do. When someone is detached, their body closes down, not from malice but from emotional disconnection. You cannot fake presence and you cannot hide absence, but even deeper than the physical gestures is something that is not seen. It is felt. It is the energy that surrounds a person. Some people enter a room, and without speaking a word, you feel more grounded. Others walk in, and your whole body tightens. This is not imagination. This is biology and energy working together. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety, sincerity, and connection. It does this through what psychologists call neuroception, a subconscious process that detects threat or trustworthiness in another's behavior. When someone is emotionally congruent, meaning their energy, emotion, and behavior are in harmony, you feel safe with them. There is a coherence to their presence. You may not be able to explain it, but you trust it. You sense that what they say matches how they feel. This is a powerful foundation for any relationship. On the other hand, when someone's energy doesn't match their words, your nervous system picks it up immediately. They say they love you, but their tone is flat. They say they're happy to see you, but their body leans away. They say everything is fine, but they haven't looked you in the eye once. These contradictions create what can only be described as emotional static. You can't quite relax around them. Your body is alert, your heart uncertain. Again, you may dismiss this at first, but over time, that static builds into emotional exhaustion. You begin to feel like you're constantly trying to read between the lines, trying to translate their silence, their tension, their lack of warmth. This is not connection. This is confusion masquerading as love. There's a story of an elderly man who had been married for over 50 years. When asked what made his marriage last, he didn't talk about compatibility or communication. He said, "Every time she looked at me, I felt it in the air around her. It was in her silence, her cooking, the way she handed me a cup of tea. She didn't need to say she loved me. I lived inside the energy of it. That is presence. That is coherence. That is truth without noise. In relationships, energy precedes action. Presence precedes words. You must train yourself to feel what is being communicated beneath the surface. Because there is always a second conversation taking place, one that exists in gesture, tone, and energy. When you pay attention to this conversation, you begin to understand people more deeply. You stop arguing over language because you're no longer confined to it. You feel the energy behind the gesture. You know when someone means what they say, and when they don't, even if they swear otherwise. But the ability to sense energy is not a special talent. It is a natural gift we all possess. It is just often buried beneath layers of overthinking, emotional wounds, or societal conditioning. You were born knowing how to read energy. As a child, you could feel the mood of a room before anyone spoke. You knew when someone was safe and when someone wasn't. But as adults, we often unlearn this wisdom in favor of logic and surface analysis. We silence our knowing in the name of politeness or fear. To reclaim this gift, you must reconnect with your own energy. If your inner world is chaotic, you will misread others. If you're projecting your fears or insecurities, you'll interpret every gesture through the lens of your pain. But when your energy is clear, when your emotions are balanced and your heart is calm, you become a powerful mirror. You see people not as you fear they are, but as they truly are. There's a quiet strength in this. When your perception is rooted in presence, you don't need to confront people aggressively. You simply observe. You feel when someone's energy shifts, you notice the moment their voice tightens, you sense when their touch becomes hesitant, and you honor what you feel, even when they can't explain it. This is not about control. It is about wisdom, the wisdom to trust what is felt more than what is said, the wisdom to honor your nervous system when it signals discomfort, the wisdom to know when someone's presence nourishes you and when it quietly drains you. True connection doesn't hide behind grand gestures. It lives in the quiet consistencies, the way someone's energy shows up, the way their hands reach for yours, the way they lean into your presence without needing to say a word. When you are able to feel this, you stop chasing clarity. You stop demanding explanations. You simply feel the truth and act accordingly. There is a silent kind of grief that grows not from what is said, but from what is no longer done. In relationships, people often speak of betrayal through action, words spoken in anger, promises broken with intention, or boundaries crossed with deliberate force. But one of the most overlooked forms of emotional injury is the absence of gestures that once were a natural language of love. When something that used to be offered effortlessly disappears without explanation, it creates an invisible wound, the hand that no longer reaches for yours, the glance that no longer lingers, the way they stop turning toward you when you enter the room. These are not minor details, they are signals, and when you learn to pay attention to what is missing, you begin to understand what the heart has stopped saying. In the early stages of love, gestures are spontaneous. They come from a place of sincerity, not obligation, a hand placed gently on the lower back as you walk through a crowd, eyes that light up at the sound of your voice, the simple act of adjusting your blanket while you sleep. These are not grand displays, they are micro-expressions of care. What matters is not the magnitude, but the naturalness of the offering. The unspoken message is clear. Asterisk, I see you, I feel you, you matter to me. Asterisk, But what happens when these gestures fade? Not because the relationship is busy or because life gets hard, but because the emotional connection that once fueled them has quietly unraveled. Most people are taught to focus on what their partner says, but fewer are taught to pay attention to what their partner no longer does. It is not always the presence of negative behavior that breaks a relationship. Often, it is the absence of love's ordinary rituals. It is the silence that grows where warmth used to live. This kind of silence isn't always cruel. It can be quiet, subtle, and disguised as normalcy. A woman once shared that every morning, for years, her husband used to place her coffee on the bedside table before she woke. He never mentioned it. He just did it. But one day he stopped. There was no fight, no dramatic reason. He simply didn't do it anymore, and he never resumed. She didn't say anything for months. But each day, the empty table whispered something to her spirit. Something had changed. The absence of a gesture can be more powerful than the presence of an argument, because arguments show engagement, disagreement, yes, but also investment, but absence signals detachment. The emotional tether has frayed. The hand that used to reach for you now stays in its pocket. The shoulder that once turned toward you in conversation now remains angled toward the screen. These changes don't always come with explanations. They arrive silently, and if you're not present, you might miss them until the emotional damage has settled deep. In the psychology of relationships, this is referred to as emotional withdrawal. It doesn't mean someone has stopped functioning in the relationship, but it does mean they've stopped investing emotionally. And gestures are often the first things to go, because when the heart pulls back, the body follows. The way someone holds you, looks at you, touches you, these are all regulated by emotional connection. Without that connection, gestures become mechanical, if they happen at all. You might still share the same space. You might still go through the motions, but the lack of those small, intimate gestures creates a sense of abandonment in the relationship, even if no one has physically left. This kind of abandonment is quiet and slow, like water receding from the shore. It doesn't announce itself, but one day you wake up and realize you are emotionally alone. There's a quote that says, "The opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference." And indifference makes itself known not through words, but through what is no longer offered. A man might no longer ask how your day was. He might not notice when you're quiet. He might stop texting just to check in. These small lapses may seem trivial at first, but collectively they speak a louder truth. You are no longer at the center of his attention. You have become background noise, of course. It's important not to jump to conclusions. People can be distracted, life can get heavy, but patterns speak. If the absence of gestures becomes consistent, if the small signs of care vanish without effort to restore them, then you are no longer receiving love, you are experiencing its residue. Sometimes the hardest part is not that the gestures are missing, but that when you bring it up, you are made to feel needy or dramatic for noticing. You're told it's not a big deal, or you're overthinking. And so you start to question your perception, you begin to suppress your needs, but deep down you still feel the ache, because it's not about the coffee, the hand-holding, or the conversation. It's about what those things represented: thoughtfulness, emotional presence, intimacy. You can't manufacture sincerity. When love is alive, it creates movement, a movement toward, a leaning in, a reaching out. The body naturally aligns with the heart. When that movement stops, it doesn't always mean someone has stopped loving you, but it does mean something inside them has shifted. And that shift, however subtle, deserves awareness. There's an old parable about a woman who noticed her partner no longer looked up when she walked into the room. For years, his eyes would brighten every time he saw her, even after long days. But gradually that light disappeared. At first she dismissed it. He was tired, stressed, distracted, but months passed and the light never returned. She tried everything, changing her appearance, initiating affection, creating space. Still, his gestures remained flat. Finally, she asked, "Why don't you look at me like you used to?" And he replied, "I didn't even realize I had stopped." That was the truth. He hadn't decided to pull away. But he also hadn't decided to stay connected. Emotional distance often grows in the soil of inattention, not intention. In order to preserve emotional intimacy, you must be willing to notice not just what is present, but also what has disappeared. And more importantly, you must be willing to address it, not with blame, but with honesty. If your partner no longer makes small gestures of care, don't accuse, but also don't pretend it doesn't affect you. Say, "I've noticed something, and it makes me feel distant from you." Say, "I miss the way you used to hold my hand when we talked." Invite awareness, because sometimes people truly don't realize how far they've drifted until they are gently reminded. But what if the gestures don't return? What if your partner becomes aware but still chooses not to re-engage emotionally? This is where self-respect must rise. You cannot beg someone to care. You cannot plead for the return of a gesture that should flow from love. If you find yourself constantly reminding someone how to love you, then you are not receiving love. You are managing it. And love that must be managed loses its freedom, its spontaneity, its soul. There is great power in honoring the absence of a gesture as truth, not as punishment, not with resentment, but with clarity. If someone can go days, weeks, or months without making you feel seen or cherished, then that is a reflection of their emotional availability, not your worth. Presence is not proven by being around. It is proven by showing up emotionally, by staying engaged, by doing the small things that say, "You matter." If your heart feels invisible, then the absence of gestures is not a small issue. It is the visible echo of something deeper: detachment, disconnection, disinterest. These are not things you fix by giving more. They are things you discern with wisdom and respond to with strength. A relationship thrives not on words alone, but on the rituals of love. And those rituals live in gestures, in the touch that says, "I'm here." In the look that says, "I see you." In the act that says, "You still matter." When those gestures fade, pay attention. And when they don't return, understand. Silence has spoken. And sometimes the hand that no longer reaches for you is not just missing. It is revealing everything. There comes a point in your journey where clarity no longer needs to be searched for in others. It becomes something you carry within yourself. This is the quiet strength of someone who has moved beyond needing constant explanations and validations. When you learn to detach from chasing signals, gestures, and reassurances from another person, you begin to reclaim something sacred, your inner sovereignty. In many relationships, people spend years trying to decode another's behavior. They replay conversations. They analyze every glance, every silence, every change in tone, and they exhaust themselves doing so. This emotional chasing becomes a habit. You start to think that if you can just understand why he's pulling away, why he no longer touches you, why his energy feels different, then maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can do more, give more, say the right words, behave the right way. But there is a deeper truth that most people don't want to face. The more you chase clarity from another, the further you move away from your own center. When someone pulls back emotionally or behaves in a way that creates uncertainty, it is natural to want answers. The mind craves closure, the heart craves connection, but not everything that pulls away is meant to be pursued. Some things are meant to reveal you to yourself. If a man becomes inconsistent, vague, emotionally unavailable, or confusing in his gestures toward you. The most powerful question is not, what does this mean? But, what am I allowing myself to feel in the face of his inconsistency? In other words, the focus must shift from trying to control the gesture to understanding your own inner reaction to it. There is a story of a woman who had been in a relationship for 5 years. In the first year, her partner was attentive, expressive, affectionate. But gradually his warmth began to cool. He became less present. He stopped initiating touch. He offered fewer words, but he never left. He stayed physically, yet became emotionally elusive. She spent the next 4 years trying to pull him back into emotional presence. She read every self-help book. She communicated her needs clearly. She tried giving more, loving better, being patient, but nothing changed. The gestures that once defined their intimacy were gone, and she was left managing the remnants of their connection. Finally, in a moment of stillness, she asked herself, why am I holding on to someone who shows me, through his actions, that he has already let go? That question didn't break her. It freed her. When someone's gestures no longer reflect care, consistency, or presence, it is not always a sign that they are cruel or malicious, but it is a signal that they are not meeting you where you are, and the wise response is not to beg for alignment, but to embody it within yourself. Compassionate detachment is the art of staying connected to your values, your truth, and your peace, even as someone else drifts from theirs. Detachment is not indifference. It does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what is not yours to carry. It means you recognize when the emotional labor of a relationship has become one-sided, when someone is not showing up fully, consistently, or sincerely. You no longer attempt to compensate for their absence by abandoning yourself. There is an ancient principle that says, the flower does not chase the bee, it blossoms, and the bee comes. In relationships, we are often taught that love requires effort, and yes, healthy relationships do require conscious effort. But there is a difference between effort and chasing. Effort arises from mutual respect, commitment, and desire. Chasing arises from imbalance, fear, and emotional hunger. The one who is whole within does not chase. They observe, they discern. They allow others to reveal themselves through time, through consistency, and through presence. When a man's gestures become unclear, when he sends mixed signals, when his actions no longer align with his words, your role is not to convince him to return to alignment. Your role is to return yourself to alignment. The discomfort you feel is not solely about his behavior. It is about the inner misalignment you are experiencing by tolerating emotional inconsistency. Every time you ignore what you feel in your body, your gut instinct, your rising anxiety, your disappointment, you train yourself to disconnect from your own wisdom. But when you choose to become the embodiment of clarity, you begin to recognize that you never needed to chase answers. You only needed to stop abandoning the ones you already knew. This inner clarity allows you to become still in the presence of confusion. You no longer rush to fix, to please, to interpret. You sit in truth. You observe, you allow someone's behavior to teach you about them, rather than using it to doubt yourself. This kind of emotional discipline is not loud. It does not declare itself with ultimatums or drama. It reveals itself in the calm decision to remain rooted in self-respect. There's a moment in every relationship where you are tested, not by conflict, but by silence, when someone you love withdraws their energy, their touch, their warmth, and you're left staring into the emptiness they once filled. It is easy to panic, but that moment is sacred, because it is in that void that you meet yourself. You learn to sit with uncertainty without crumbling. You learn to honor what you feel without demanding someone else validate it. You learn that your peace does not have to depend on another's presence. A quote from a wise teacher says, to master relationships, you must first master solitude. Because if you cannot stand in your own emotional center when someone else pulls away, then you are not loving from fullness. You are loving from fear, and love rooted in fear will always lead to chasing, compromising, and emotional self-abandonment. When you begin to detach with compassion, something shifts in your energy. You no longer walk into a room needing someone to confirm your worth. You no longer wait for a call or a gesture to feel secure. You walk in whole, and from that wholeness you give, not because you are trying to hold someone, but because you are no longer afraid of being left. The truth is, you cannot force someone to offer genuine gestures of love. You cannot manipulate sincerity. You cannot demand authenticity. What you can do is become the kind of person who recognizes when those gestures are absent, and instead of begging for them, you stand in the dignity of your own enoughness. There's another story. A woman was dating a man who was kind but inconsistent. He would be warm and attentive for a few weeks, and then distant and cold the next. She constantly found herself wondering if she had done something wrong. One day, after yet another cycle of emotional withdrawal, she didn't confront him. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply stopped waiting. She stopped explaining her worth. She stopped participating in the confusion. When he noticed the change in her energy and asked why she was being distant, she replied, "I'm not distant. I'm just no longer trying to hold together something you keep letting go of." That was not anger speaking. That was clarity. This is what it means to embody the energy you once searched for in others, to become a mirror of emotional maturity, to lead with dignity, not desperation, and in doing so, you begin to attract not confusion, but coherence, not emotional games, but grounded connection. You will always know the truth of a relationship by the way it feels in your nervous system. When someone's gestures are aligned with presence, care, and consistency, you feel safe. You feel grounded. You feel seen. When those gestures are erratic, absent, or hollow, you feel anxious, unsettled, and alone, even when you're not physically alone. Do not ignore this wisdom. It lives in your body. It speaks through your breath, your sleep, your joy, or the lack thereof. To detach with compassion is to honor both your love for another and your love for yourself. It is the realization that you are not here to chase clarity from someone else. You are here to become it. And when you walk with that kind of inner coherence, the right people don't confuse you. They recognize you. They rise to meet you, because you are no longer asking for a gesture. You are embodying what the gesture represents. In the end, it is not the grand declarations or rehearsed promises that reveal the truth of someone's heart. It is the subtle gesture, the unguarded look, the natural inclination to move closer rather than away. These are the quiet indicators of presence, affection, and alignment, and when those gestures are missing, or when they become hollow echoes of what once was, it is not your role to chase, to plead, or to prove your worth. It is your role to see clearly, to feel deeply, and to respond with inner integrity. Every relationship offers us a mirror, not only of who the other person is, but of who we are in their presence. When we learn to observe without attachment, to feel without clinging, and to love without losing ourselves, we discover a kind of freedom that no external validation can offer. We stop searching for answers in someone else's behavior and begin to listen to the wisdom already whispering within. Truth is not always spoken, love is not always announced, and sincerity is not always explained, but it is always revealed to the one who is still enough, aware enough, and brave enough to see what is there, and also what is not. When you begin to trust what you feel more than what you are told, when you stop negotiating with inconsistency and start honoring your own clarity, you step into the kind of love that no longer begs. It simply chooses, quietly, calmly, and completely.